to the media and said, well, of course, we'd entertain. We'd love to have an invitation, or, something along the lines of we'd entertain an invitation to Sandringham. Of course, he wants that because if you're invited by the king, you automatically get state-funded security, which is all he cares about. He doesn't want to spend any more dollars of his own.
King Charles may finally be starting to realise that there is absolutely no reason to work with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle.
The Sandringham snub isn't just a cold shoulder, it's King Charles making the boldest royal power move we've seen in years. A source close to the king confirmed it directly. Harry and Meghan will not be getting that Sandringham invite this summer, and the Australian tour is exactly why. The source called it the straw that broke the camel's back, and honestly, that says it all. After years of taking hit after hit, the Oprah interview, the Netflix documentary, Spare, the Kyiv speech, the digs at the children's royal titles, Charles finally reached his breaking point. The Australian tour's conduct crossed a line he simply wasn't willing to let slide. But here's where things get spicy. Harry wasn't sitting around waiting for an invite that was already on the table. Instead, he went straight to the press and let it be known the family would consider an invitation to Sandringham as if he was doing Charles a favour, not actually making a request.
Charles's courtiers briefed the Daily Mail, oh no, we're not going to punish them, we don't want to upset them, the titles aren't going to go, the line of succession isn't going to go. No, you've got to do something, Charles, because this is getting worse. And they're embarrassing you. They're embarrassing you in Ukraine. They're embarrassing you in Washington, D.C. They're embarrassing you on the internet. Think about anti-bullying as seen as a bully inside the palace. Absolutely, he is. When he doesn't get what he wants, he stamps his foot like a child and not only does what he was going to do anyway, but then tries to emotionally blackmail his father with his own children, Archie and Lily.
That move was calculated. It used the grandchildren as emotional leverage, put all the pressure on Charles to make the first move, and made Harry look open to reconciliation while making sure any reunion would happen strictly on his terms. Multiple observers called it exactly what it was, a pressure play, executed through carefully chosen press channels. The grandchildren became the ultimate card to play. Charles has met Lily once, and Archie possibly twice, a grandfather-grandchild bond that Harry and Meghan have essentially kept from forming. That's one of the most genuinely painful parts of this whole situation, and Harry knows it. Making attendance conditional on whether William and Catherine would be there was a deliberate move. The message? Bring the grandchildren if Charles meets the terms, withhold them if he doesn't. Charles refusing to issue that invitation is his way of saying he won't be played like that. Yes, it costs him personally he won't see Archie and Lily. But it sends an unmistakable message. That kind of conduct doesn't get rewarded. There's also a legal dimension making this even messier. The Centre Ballet lawsuit and the Shankar defamation case.
The king looked very weak if he did have them to Sandringham. Harry and Meghan will come, but it won't be at the king's invitation, my source said adamantly. We shall see.
Had already made a Sandringham invite politically risky before the Australian tour even happened. A king who welcomes someone to Sandringham, while that person is a defendant in an active lawsuit, one brought by a black woman who chaired a charity Harry himself founded, would essentially be picking sides in open court. Charles cannot do that while cases are still moving. The Australian tour made it institutionally impossible. Now add the financial picture and things get even more intense. Multiple inside sources say the Sussex operation is under serious financial pressure. Diana's inheritance is largely gone. Legal costs are estimated at $38 million. Security alone runs around $3 million every year. The speaking fees, the brand deals, the product lines, none of it is keeping pace with the expenses. The 5-year runway is the timeline being whispered about before their whole lifestyle needs a serious reset. So when Harry was pushing hard for that Sandringham invite, it wasn't purely about family feelings. A formal visit would mean state-funded security shifting the single biggest financial drain straight onto the public purse. A source confirmed it straight up. All he cares about is getting state-funded security because he doesn't want to spend any more of his own dollars. The money is running out fast. Charles pulling that invitation hits every pressure point at once. No security coverage, no institutional backing, no access to the royal brand the commercially struggling Sussex operation desperately needs right now.
It would depend on who was there, aka William and Catherine. And it was, at the time, it was blatant emotional blackmail for the king. However, the king and the palace did put something out, a statement out that was quite strongly worded. And, he would love to meet his grandchildren. He's only met Lily once for a hot second. Archie possibly twice.
But the Kyiv speech, that's what exposes everything most clearly. Harry has given interview after interview about wanting to reconcile with his father before it's too late, about how illness makes family bonds more urgent. And then just 3 days before Charles's state visit to Washington, Harry steps up to a podium at a Kyiv security forum and publicly criticizes American leadership, attacking the approach to Ukraine treaty obligations. The timing was brutal. Charles's Washington trip meant pausing cancer treatment, a punishing schedule across Washington, New York, and Virginia, followed by a solo visit to Bermuda, all designed to repair a critical bilateral relationship at serious personal and physical cost. Oncologists consistently point to stress as a significant factor in cancer treatment outcomes. Harry's speech forced Charles to walk into Washington knowing his own son had just publicly worked against the very administration Charles was flying in to build goodwill with. The generous read on Harry is that he's simply thoughtless, that he genuinely doesn't connect his public moves to the real damage they cause the people around him. The less generous read? That he connects those dots perfectly and decided his own visibility and the commercial value of a high-profile international appearance were worth more than his father's diplomatic mission. And according to sources inside Harry's own circle, that less charitable version is exactly what they believe.
After the shopping website, no. You're going to sell your trauma closet for cash? Absolutely not. This is disgusting.
The word they use is incredibly self-centered. Someone who needs to be seen, who will manufacture moments in the spotlight, no matter what the fallout looks like for everyone else around him. Then there's the US Weekly story, which drops a cold, hard commercial data point into the middle of everything. During the Wakeford era, US Weekly made a deliberate pivot toward pro-Sussex coverage, trying to copy the People magazine model of celebrity access journalism built around the couple. The result? A 50% staff cut and an office closure after Wakeford walked out. That's what happens when a Sussex-focused strategy fails to deliver, colliding head-on with the broader collapse of access journalism as a whole. As the couple's commercial value to media outlets has tanked, the outlet that chased their narrative the hardest is now gutting its own staff. Then comes the Dan Wakeford question: does a former insider finally confirming what independent commentators have been saying for years count as vindication, or just a frustratingly late arrival to the truth? The frustration from people who've been reporting accurately all along is real and justified, but the practical response has to be clear. More people telling the truth is always better than fewer.
Here's what I found. The finances are not what the headlines tell you. The $100 million Netflix deal was never $100 million. The $20 million Spotify deal was not $20 million. Sources say that the inheritance that Princess Diana gave Harry is mostly gone, and their outgoings are huge, with security bills, multiple mortgages, and legal fees estimated at $38 million. The TV projects are not what the press releases say either. The scripted polo drama, sources say it won't see the light of day.
No matter how late they show up, access journalism is exactly what created this gap in the first place. To keep access, you don't report what your subject doesn't want reported. You trade accuracy for proximity. But the moment that relationship ends, the moment Wakeford leaves US Weekly, the moment the couple's commercial value fades, the constraints disappear, and honest reporting becomes possible again. This is the fundamental flaw when a subject actively manages their own coverage. And nobody in the current British royal media landscape has managed their coverage more aggressively than the Sussex operation. Outlets with access reported what access allowed. Outlets without it reported what was actually observable. And the observable reality backed by YouGov polling at 30%, Roy Morgan numbers at 81%, and Wakeford's own financial sourcing tells one consistent story: goals that can't be reconciled, finances under serious pressure, and a commercial operation in decline. The Sandringham withdrawal is Charles saying out loud what those numbers have already been quietly saying.
Harry's visit to Ukraine and his attack on Donald Trump and the American administration specifically, literally 4 days before King Charles is touching down in Washington, D.C. To me, that was the ultimate slight to his father.
The Australian tour was the final straw, and the era of accommodation is over. Now the institution is starting to move, and the summer will reveal exactly what that movement produces. Serious analysts keep pointing to the Danish royal family as the model. The Danish queen woke up one day and stripped titles from the extended royal family, keeping them only for the direct line. It was abrupt, unexpected, and caused short-term distress. But by those same family members' own accounts afterward, it was the right call. It freed them without creating the kind of bitter, permanent estrangement a more confrontational approach would have caused. The British version of that decision, whether made by Charles or more likely by William, would mean issuing an order in council that redraws the boundaries of princely style and Royal Highness designation, limiting them strictly to the direct line. Harry keeps his Duke of Sussex title but loses the style of prince and the Royal Highness designation. The children keep their names, but their royal titles become inapplicable. And just like that, the commercial use of Prince Archie and Princess Lily in candle descriptions and domain registrations loses the institutional backing that made it worth anything in the first place. The half-in, half-out arrangement gets formally ended by stripping the institutional piece that made the in part possible. This is exactly the mechanism Lady Colin Campbell has pointed to as both available and proportionate. It's the mechanism the Danish precedent proves is achievable within a working constitutional monarchy.
Comes to a trip like this, which remember is already incredibly stressful for King Charles. He's having to stop his cancer treatment in order to go. If you look at the itinerary, Paula, which I know you'll be all across, I mean, it's actually for someone who is going through cancer treatment, very, very taxing.
Charles has the authority to do it now, but it's William who will almost certainly be the one to pull the trigger when the crown passes to him. The timing question has been one of the biggest uncertainties in all of this. Does Charles act before William inherits, or does the decision get passed down? The Sandringham withdrawal is a signal that Charles is moving slowly, incrementally, but moving toward a more substantial institutional response. Make no mistake though, this is the minimum possible response. It's not an order in council, it's not a title revocation. It's simply not issuing an invitation that Harry's entire media campaign was engineered to force. But it is a response documented, sourced, and carrying the full institutional weight of a king saying, for the first time with real observable consequence, that the Australian tour's conduct was not acceptable. William's influence on this decision isn't publicly confirmed, but institutionally it makes complete sense. Charles's advisors, who briefed that there would be no consequences for the Australian tour, apparently weren't the voices that won the argument when the Sandringham question landed on the table. The voice that won was the source who said the Australian tour was the straw that broke the camel's back, language that signals a decision already made, not one still being debated. Then there's the Hugo Vickers angle confirmation from the late Queen's close confidant that she believed Harry and Meghan may have been recording her private conversations. Another example of the exact same pattern playing out all over again. The concern was reported in 2020 and dismissed. Vickers confirmed it in 2026.
Ukraine, he's like, oh God, why? Why? Then he gets handed the speech, by the way, written by AI, according to Tom Sykes, which is attacking Donald Trump. And that is stress. That is stress. And that, to me, is an illustration of someone who actually doesn't give a damn about his father.
6 years later, during those 6 years, the conduct continued, the commercial exploitation continued, and the institutional response was to absorb it rather than address it. The honest account gets confirmed only after the damage has already piled up. That's the real cost of deference in the royal media world. By the time a credentialed insider validates what independent reporters were saying all along, the conduct has been running unchecked for years. If the Sandringham withdrawal holds, it marks the beginning of real consequences 6 years into a post-royal split where the conduct has been thoroughly documented and repeatedly absorbed without a single meaningful institutional response. That shift matters. The contrast with Charles's state visit to Washington could not be more stark. Charles traveled to repair a critical bilateral relationship at serious personal cost, pausing cancer treatment, pushing through a punishing itinerary, doing exactly what the monarchy exists to do. Deploying soft power in the service of a specific national interest, in a space where elected politicians couldn't get the same results through conventional diplomatic channels. He did it while seriously ill. He did it with no commercial arrangement. He did it for the country, not for a brand. Harry gave a speech criticizing American leadership from an international security forum in Kyiv 3 days before Charles landed in Washington. The contrast speaks for itself. It is the permanent record of two completely different understandings of what royal identity means and what it's for, playing out simultaneously in the same week for the entire world to see. The Sandringham withdrawal is the institution's answer to that contrast.
Post-Australia polls were horrific. And I think he just needs to be in the public eye. I think he's incredibly self-centered. And the one thing that the king and the palace have always said to him is, stop talking to the press.
In the most measured, proportionate terms available, the message is clear. One of those two understandings will not be accommodated. This is not the order in council. It is not the title revocation. It is the beginning. The summer is coming. The state visit will produce its diplomatic outcomes. The security review will deliver its determination. The Centre Ballet case will move forward. The Daily Mail judgment will arrive. And the Sandringham gate will stay closed at least for this summer while the institution moves, slowly but deliberately, toward the kind of clarity the late Queen tried to establish back in January 2020, before 6 years of absorbing the next hit got in the way. The camel's back is broken. The only question now is whether the institution acts on that break or goes back to waiting for the next straw. Then there's the Charlotte Griffith dimension, and this one has genuinely shifted the conversation. The Facebook messages that surfaced from the Daily Mail proceedings have done something no amount of commentary could. They converted previously skeptical observers to her account of her relationship with Harry, a relationship he denied under oath. The messages prove it existed, full stop. That documentary evidence changed the coverage landscape in a specific and permanent way. People who had given more weight to Harry's sworn testimony than to Griffith's account now have the receipts, and they've reassessed accordingly. Griffith is now speaking more openly about the relationship, about William's position, about the coronation exclusion, about the deep personal tension.
This moment with Sarah Fosmo, Prince Harry's chief of staff, where Meghan quite obviously gives her the death stare, and anyone who has worked for Harry and Meghan knows that you get the death stare in public, but what you get in private is strips torn off you.
Because the messages established her credibility in a way nothing else could. This is exactly the documentary evidence mechanism that independent commentators have been pointing to for years. The Mulroney pre-draft statement, the Borough repudiation, the Facebook messages, the honest record, eventually confirmed, and this time, impossible to dismiss. Every single piece of the honest record that gets confirmed by documentary evidence permanently shifts the conversation because it's no longer one person's word against another's. It's a document against a denial, and denials are a finite resource. Harry can deny things that haven't been documented yet, but once the documentary evidence exists, the denial creates its own contrast preserved permanently in the courts, in the coverage, and in the public record. Think about how this pattern has already played out. The recording concern reported in 2020, dismissed, mocked, called a conspiracy, confirmed in 2026 by one of the most credentialed royal insiders alive. 6 years. The gap between the honest report and the institutional confirmation is 6 years of conduct that continued unchecked, 6 years of commercial exploitation, 6 years of managed narrative dominance, and then one document, one confirmation, one insider account changes the entire landscape permanently. The Daily Mail case has already produced multiple pieces of documentary evidence that directly contradict specific sworn statements. The Centre Ballet discovery process will produce more. The Heritage Foundation visa review will eventually generate its own evidentiary record. Each new document, each new disclosure, each new piece of confirmed testimony narrows the space where the managed narrative can operate. The walls are closing in slowly, legally, documented. And here's what makes this moment different from every other moment in the past 6 years. It's not just one thing. It's everything arriving in the same week, from different directions, through different channels, confirmed by different sources. That kind of convergence doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't reverse itself easily. The Town and Country, People magazine, and Vanity Fair outlets still operating inside the Sussex Access Circle are the shrinking remainder of an access journalism ecosystem.
Literally a workplace psychopath, smiling to the public on one side of her face and glowering at you on the secret side. The woman treats anyone she has power over as totally disposable. You are just treated like a tradesman who is there to fix the toilet.
That once made the managed narrative dominant in mainstream coverage. These outlets built their Sussex coverage on access. Access required protecting the subject from damaging reporting. Protecting the subject from damaging reporting meant not publishing what was actually observable. The result was a version of events that polling numbers, documentary evidence, and insider sourcing have now systematically dismantled piece by piece, document by document, confirmation by confirmation. The US weekly closure is the commercial verdict on that model. An outlet that pivoted aggressively toward pro-Sussex coverage, that bet its editorial identity on the access journalism approach, that staked its commercial future on the couple's continued cultural relevance, is now cutting half its staff and shutting its offices. That is not a coincidence. That is the market delivering its judgment on a coverage model the audience has walked away from. The Daily Telegraph's willingness to run the Wakeford sourcing alongside the managed narrative is something else entirely. It's the editorial crack that independent commentary has been pushing toward for years. When a mainstream outlet of the Telegraph standing publishes financial sourcing describing the Sussex operation as being under serious pressure, confirms inheritance money largely gone, and puts a $38 million figure on legal costs, that is alternative commentary's reporting entering the mainstream in a way that cannot be dismissed as fringe speculation, that moment matters. It changes what other mainstream outlets can now report without appearing to be outliers. The Heat magazine source quotes, and the Roy Morgan poll numbers sitting in the same information environment, that comparison is available to any reader who chooses to make it. The 81% Australian unfavourability rating, the UK YouGov 30% approval, the financial pressure, the legal exposure, the diplomatic damage from the Kyiv speech, the Sandringham withdrawal. Any reader with access to the full information environment can now assemble a picture that managed narrative channels are structurally incapable of presenting, because presenting it would require acknowledging sourcing their access. Relationship prohibits them from touching. The Charlotte Griffith messages deserve their own moment because what they represent goes beyond the specific relationship they document. They represent the arrival of irrefutable documentary evidence in a situation where the denial had been maintained under oath, a sworn denial, court testimony, and then the messages. The messages don't ask anyone to believe a competing account. They don't require trusting one person's memory over another's. They exist. They are readable. They say what they say.
Hugo Vickers comes out in his book, and remember, he's a great guy, close confidant of late Queen Elizabeth II, finally comes out and says, oh yeah, the Queen was worried that Harry and Meghan were wired and that they were secretly recording the conversations and potentially trying to set them up. I mean, I reported that back in 2020, Paula, and at that point, people were calling me a conspiracy theorist.
And what they say contradicts what was said under oath in a court of law. The people who previously gave more weight to the sworn testimony than to Griffith's account, serious, thoughtful people applying genuine evidentiary standards, not simply defenders of the managed narrative. Those people now have access to the documentary evidence, and they have reassessed publicly. That reassessment is permanent. It cannot be walked back. It cannot be managed. It is the coverage landscape changing in real time, driven not by commentary or opinion, but by documents that exist and can be read by anyone. Griffith is now speaking more openly about the relationship itself, about William's position toward her, about the coronation exclusion, about the depth of personal tension that has existed beneath the surface of the public story for years. She is speaking more openly because the messages established her credibility in a way no amount of personal testimony could have achieved on its own. The documentary evidence did what years of honest reporting couldn't quite complete. It made dismissal impossible. This is the mechanism. This is how the honest record eventually wins. Not through louder commentary, not through more passionate advocacy, not through being right more loudly or more often, through documents, through evidence, through the slow, unglamorous, legally driven accumulation of confirmable facts that the managed narrative simply cannot absorb without contradiction. The invitation withdrawal, the Wakeford vindication, the Charlotte Griffith messages, the Kyiv speeches, diplomatic fallout, the US weekly closure, the Hugo Vickers confirmation, the Roy Morgan numbers, the YouGov polling, the financial sourcing, the legal exposure. This is the week's permanent record, and it lands on one side of the ledger with a weight that the managed narrative channels do not have the sourcing, the credibility, or the evidentiary foundation to match. The managed narrative will process all of it through its remaining channels. Town and Country will run a sympathetic feature. People magazine will publish a source-adjacent quote about resilience and moving forward. Vanity Fair will frame the week's events through the lens of institutional hostility toward a couple who simply wanted to live their lives. That processing will happen. It will reach its audience. But that audience is smaller than it was, and the commercial verdict of the US weekly closure tells you exactly how much smaller. And it is still shrinking. The honest record will process the same week through independent journalism, documentary evidence, insider sourcing, and polling numbers. That processing will also reach its audience. And that audience is the one the Roy Morgan 81% and the YouGov 30% represent, an audience that has already made its assessment and has the evidentiary basis to maintain it against any managed counter-narrative. The comparison is right there, available, accessible, for any reader, any viewer, any person paying attention who chooses to look at both information environments and make their own judgment. The gap between what access journalism channels are reporting and what the documentary evidence confirms is not subtle. It is not a matter of interpretation. It is the difference between a managed version of events and the actual events, and the documents keep arriving to make that difference undeniable. The summer will produce more. The Centre Ballet case will move through discovery. The Daily Mail judgment will arrive. The Heritage Foundation visa review will deliver its conclusions. The security determination will come. Each of these processes will produce its own documentary record. Each record will either confirm or contradict the existing picture. And given the pattern of the past 6 years, the Vickers confirmation, the Griffith messages, the Mulroney pre-draft account, the Borough repudiation, the direction of that confirmation is not difficult to anticipate. A camel's back, once broken, does not fix itself just because someone asks nicely. The weight that broke it is still there. The additional weight keeps arriving. And the institution that spent 6 years trying to absorb it without breaking is now, in the most measured and proportionate terms available, beginning to set some of it down. Then there is Charles. His centenary address, marking 1/3 of his reign, delivered from Balmoral, with visible signs of physical strain in the recording explicitly renewing his pledge of duty and service, not a celebration, not a triumphant retrospective, a pledge, renewed under conditions that make the renewal genuinely costly. renewed by a man who paused cancer treatment to fly to Washington in service of a bilateral relationship that elected politicians could not repair through conventional channels, renewed by a man who has spent 6 years absorbing conduct that the polling numbers, the documentary evidence, and now his own sourced institutional decision confirm was not acceptable, and who has finally, in this specific documented week, said so. The pledge is not abdication. The service continues. The institution continues. At whatever personal cost the service requires, and in this specific season, that cost is measurable, visible, and documented in a way that provides the sharpest possible contrast with the conduct it is being weighed against. In the same week that Charles renewed his pledge of duty from Balmoral with visible physical difficulty, having paused cancer treatment to serve the national interest in Washington, the decision was made not to issue the Sandringham invitation that Harry's carefully constructed emotional pressure campaign was designed to force. The grandchildren as leverage, the media framing as tactical positioning, the conditional availability as the mechanism for applying pressure while maintaining the appearance of openness. All of it calculated, all of it documented, all of it now met with a response that is equally documented, equally sourced, and carries the full institutional weight of a king who has finally reached his limit. Both decisions belong to the same person. The pledge of service and the withdrawal of the invitation, the state visit at personal cost, and the refusal to be leveraged through the grandchildren. The renewal of duty and the beginning of real consequences. Same person, same week, same permanent record. That record is what remains when the managed narrative has run its cycle through the remaining access channels and the news week has moved on. The documents remain. The polling numbers remain. The sourced decisions remain. The contrast between Charles's conduct and the conduct the Sandringham withdrawal is responding to remains fixed, permanent, and available for anyone who chooses to look at the full picture rather than the managed version of it. This is where the story stands at the end of this specific and extraordinary week. The institution is moving. Slowly, measurably, documentably, but moving. The summer will show exactly what that movement produces. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of everything unfolding behind those palace walls right now, smash that like button and share this with someone who needs to see the full story. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Which piece of this week's record hit hardest for you, and what do you think is coming next this summer? Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single update, because with the Centre Ballet case moving forward, the Daily Mail judgment on its way, and the summer just getting started, this story is absolutely nowhere near over. See you in the next one.